Thanks for tuning into the For Those Made to Do podcast. We are your hosts, Mandy Sahota
and Bianca Pavel. This podcast is all about the doers who have achieved career success in the UAE and the stories that go with it.
In this episode, we get to have a super thoughtful conversation with Pooja Vithlani, who has 20 plus years of experience of building products globally, and it really gave us a lot to think about. We talk through what it takes to be a successful product manager, the skills that are required today, and how the role will evolve in the future, with data playing an even bigger part at the heart of the role.
So tune in now to hear Pooja's take on what makes a super app truly great, how AI is changing the roadmap game, and why now is the perfect time to jump into product management. We hope you enjoy it. Hi everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of For Those Made to Do. Today we're diving into the really exciting world of product management because let's be honest, great products don't just happen. There's a lot of strategy and testing behind an outstanding product. To add to that, customers today want real solutions to their problems, and in the UAE, where tech is growing at about 8% annually and millions of dollars are being poured into tech startups, building the right product has never been more important. Now, we all know Dubai is on a mission to become a global tech hub, and at the center of all this growth, you'll find, of course, product managers. They sit at the crossroads of design, marketing, and engineering, and they are the people who make the high-stakes decisions that can either make or break a product. Now, since it's such a big topic, we needed an expert to shed some light on it, and we were so lucky to find just the right person, Pooja Vithlani. Pooja is a seasoned product executive, advisor, and founder with over 20 years of experience from Microsoft, Expedia, Kitopi, some of the coolest brands out there. And she's also a co-founder of a prop tech startup. You may know this, she has helped build the Middle East's first super app, which has changed the way 33 million people move, eat, and shop. So, no biggie. I'm sure you've heard of Careem before, and I know I use it every day, so really for me today is like meeting the heroine behind the scenes. Not to mention that Pooja is also the founder of the MENA Women Product Managers Guild and has authored a book on product management upskilling. So Pooja, welcome. We're so excited to have you in the studio, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you.
We're excited to have you too, and thanks Bianca for such a great introduction. And it's so lovely to have you in the studio. So to get the conversation warmed up, let's kick off with a bit of an icebreaker. So you spent years solving complex problems for millions of users, but if your closest friends were to design a product just for you, what would they build you?
It's a really fun question, actually. There's two things my really close friends know about me. One is I'm a big foodie, and specifically with chicken wings.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if there's any product they could build that would give me chicken wings, but on demand. But I think the other thing that they know about me is that I have the worst memory in the world. I'll forget. Everything falls out of my head. So I think they would build me a product which allows almost like I'd say maybe a listener of all of my conversations and my thoughts, and tags them so that they can be played back at any point in time with just some quick reference. That would really help me in my life.
Yeah, because we have that for Zoom and Microsoft now, your AI assistant and stuff, but it's only if the meeting has started and if you allow it into the meeting. If it's on your phone and your phone is with you all day and you allow it to kind of record some of these things, you know what? If they build it, please send me a link. I need that as well.
I'll monetize this thing.
For sure.
So let's start by breaking down what product management actually is. And what is it about it that kept you on this path for so long?
Yes, it's a really great question because product management can sometimes be considered quite an ambiguous role. And due to that, a lot of people make it what they think it should be. But over the years, there's really been a defined sort of science around product management. The way I would describe it is in a company where I'll give you the tech version of a product manager, in a company where technology is being built, the product manager is the person who sits in between the business and a lot of other organizations, including the engineering organization, the design organization, marketing, all of the other finance, everybody, and really decides, of all the technological requirements that they have to solve their problems. Number one, is it a real problem that's worth solving? Number two, what is the data behind that is going to be impacted if they solve the problem? And then, is it worth solving? and why would you solve it? And then they take those requirements, they drive a lot of buy-in across the different stakeholders, and then they're responsible for actually delivering that product through, their engineering partners, their design UX partners, et cetera, and keeping everybody abreast of what is the status of it, why certain things have been prioritized, why others have not, given limited resources, and really driving a lot of cohesion around the whole process. So lots of different areas that they cover, a lot of influence and impact without necessarily having the authority, and just ownership in general.
And in a role like this, so my background, I used to recruit for digital companies before, and we used to recruit project managers. And there's always like a support team behind the product manager as well. So you have the business analyst and the QA person. So could you just talk a little bit around that? Because I know a lot of our audience, they just assume that you need to come from a technical background.
Right.
And I just wondered if you could kind of clear up the dynamics of how you get to the results with the team around you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because a product manager doesn't usually operate on their own. They do require a team around them to really deliver on what they're doing. So number one, to answer your first question, you don't need a technical background to be a product manager. There is such a role as a technical product manager, which probably will be valuable for you to have a technical background for. Doesn't mean you're sitting there coding, but as long as you have technical aptitude and this desire to learn the technology, I think you can pick that up. It's a really, really fine balance between being an introvert and being able to, work on sort of some of the more extroverted activities, right? When you think about sort of the more technical background, we tend to think more introverted individuals who aren't necessarily comfortable taking things and driving stakeholder requirements, et cetera, and pushing back, saying no when it's required. But you really have to manage different stakeholders. So when you think about the team that product managers need to be successful, and again, it depends on the scale and the scope of the organization. You may actually have smaller organizations where the product manager is doing it all, some startups, et cetera. So really strong data aptitude. And if you're lucky enough to have a business analyst or a product analyst to work alongside you, that's hugely valuable. UX and design teams are also very, very valuable. They think through, UX specifically thinks through the patterns that are really going to drive engagement and usage in the most intuitive way for when they're building a product. Then you've got obviously your development team, and that usually comprises of the actual developers, the people who are coding. It also sometimes comprises of your architects who are going to, define, what are the components of the platform, how they're going to work together. If you're working on a platform side initiative, you'll have your QA, as you mentioned, those that are, assessing the quality of the product at the very end before you take it to market, making sure it's fit to launch. I'm sure there's a lot of other stakeholders that would be involved in these types of products. And nowadays, obviously, you've got data scientists as well. With AI and the emergence and adoption of AI, it's always really valuable to have a data scientist on your team as well.
And with all of that being said and working in these kind of complex teams, what's kept you in the role so long?
One thing I love about product management is that you're taking these concepts, whether they're entire products that you're building from 0 to 1, or you've got a product that you need to optimize and drive higher value to the business for or the end users for. There's always a different challenge. And it's almost like you can't have the same experience every day. There's always going to be something different. There's always a new problem to solve. There's a new opportunity to reach. And I just think it just doesn't get boring. And then there's always new practices and new technology that's constantly coming out. So with that, you're forced to have this growth mindset, continue to stay on top of it, continue to learn and just evolve with it.
So we've talked about the role of a product manager. And since you've been in the region, I believe, for 5 years or so, what have you observed in this region that needs to change, specifically in the UAE, to truly empower, say, female leaders in the product and tech space?
In the UAE and everywhere globally, obviously tech is a very male-dominated industry, like many industries out there. So we definitely need more women, not only in product and tech, but in leadership positions as well. And because it is male dominated, I do believe that there's two factors to this. One is the fewer females we have in the industry step into this responsibility, which they often do, but very consciously step into the responsibility of making sure that, other women are encouraged to join, number one, in the tech community and be an example of, look, it's not intimidating. You can do this. There are ways in, and there's a support system for you once you're in. And encourage women, especially women in leadership, being the role model for other women to kind of aspire to, and also making sure that they're sponsoring and advocating for other women in their team. And when there are new roles that are open, also encouraging women to apply. That's number one. But it being a male-dominated industry, the allyship of men is super critical. I recently had somebody ask me, in fact, a few people in light of International Women's Day that just passed, a few topics that came up. Well, how do we as men make sure that we're doing what we can to encourage women to, have their voice, have their say? It's got to be a very intentional action of, if you are in a room where you see a woman as a minority and maybe she's not speaking up as much, or she is speaking up, but she's not being heard, to be that voice of advocacy for her. Say, hey, just encouraging that she speaks up more. Contributions are valued. So I think that's one of the ways they can do that. And then men in executive positions, you have the ability to say, look, we are going to look for women for these roles, and being very, very aware of that unconscious bias of trying to hire people like me, right? And just saying, hey, for this role, we really want to make sure we have at least, you want to give the job to the best candidate. It doesn't matter what gender they are, but at least making sure that you're putting it out there that you want 50% of applicants to be women. So you're really challenging your recruitment team to find and source women who could be qualified for this role versus, just men who are the majority of it. And then when it comes to sponsorship, being a mentor, being a sponsor, advocating for women when they're not in the room, and making sure when you're in a room where there are only men, seeking up and saying, hey, where is so-and-so, or how do we bring in a different perspective here and bring a woman in the room? Those are things which I think really need to happen. In the Middle East and the UAE, what I see primarily, which is a little bit of an irk for me, if I'm honest, quite an irk for me, is when you see a lot of tech panels happening. And, this is where people are invited to listen to the voices of the region leaders and people of influence. Oftentimes, I don't see a woman in there. In
same.
that form. And I always think, well, the excuse can't be, well, there aren't that many women in leadership. Even if there are a few, invite them over and over and over so they can come in and speak, and they can tell you, hey, maybe next time bring this person or that person in. Let them be part of the conversation so that we can advocate for each other, and you have an equal, even if not equal, just have one or two women in that panel so that other people can see, hey, there is diversity here, and diversity in thought and diversity in leadership. And all opinions are going to be valued, and regardless of what gender they come from.
Absolutely. And from just a different perspective, I guess more on a granular level, when you look at people within an organization, if they have a preconception of product roles and technological roles, and they're sitting more in like marketing, for example, we see a lot of our female students gravitating to those types of roles. What would you say they should be thinking of in terms of skilling up? And where do you think for a product manager, you can take from other areas of the business that is actually a good fit to segue into that role?
When I was at Expedia, I introduced this rotation program, which allowed people to go from marketing or whichever other skill area of expertise they had, and do a 4-month, I think it was a 3-month rotation. I think we did 1 month, and then what we realized is actually in 1 month they're just learning, but they're not actually giving back to the team. So we can't really get the value out of what we invested. And in that 3-month rotation, we would interview them just like you interview any candidate. You have to qualify. We have to really be sure that this is a role you want to be in and you understand what it entails. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, because there's a bit of a misconception of what product managers do. But ultimately, when you bring them in, let them try it out. Product management's the kind of role where you actually really have to experience it to see if it's even for you. There's a little bit of, you need to have a bit of thick skin. When things go great, you push your team forward and let them take the glory. When things go terribly, you stand in front and say, shoot me, I made the mistake. So it's not as glorious as it seems from the outside. And maybe I'll talk about what I said I was going to talk about later now, which is oftentimes when you're on the outside looking in to product managers, you think that what product managers do is sit there and make a bunch of decisions. But actually, they're not doing that. They're actually going out and figuring out what decisions need to be made and influencing people to get aligned so that they can communicate those decisions and have all of that support already behind them. So it's not a negotiation at that point. It's like, okay, we did all our discovery work, all our research, and this is where we've come, and here's the data to show it, and here's why it's being prioritized, et cetera. So what may look glamorous from the outside is actually not very glamorous on the inside. And so when we brought people into the rotation program, my first question would always be, why do you want to be a product manager? I want to be a product manager because I want to make decisions. If I heard that, I was like, like you're in for a big surprise if you move into product management. But those that were like, I want to come into product management because I look at products and I think, hey, these products aren't necessarily working for the user the right way. I want to make sure we're building the right product for the user, and I want to have an impact in that respect. That is really the right mindset. right? Because it's about what you're actually doing and the impact you're going to have on the business or on the end user. So what I would encourage women to do who are looking at some more maybe female-dominated specializations is think about product management from the perspective of the impact you want to have, and think about, what is going to make you feel that you have really contributed or have really had that level of impact that you want to in the company or in your own experience and your growth, and what kind of challenges you want to take on. Because it is a path that, of course, is not for everybody, but women naturally, we have empathy, and empathy is such a big role in product management. So that's why when I see women who really have that right mindset come into product management and they're structured about how they want to learn it and their experiences, they do it phenomenally well, because there's one skill that we have that's just innate to us, right? And marketing has that similar skill set. You have to have empathy for your end user. So it is a transferable skill. So marketing in your example, but really we have a lot of product managers as well who come in from an engineering background. And they, again, are like, okay, I work with product managers. It looks easy enough. I want to be more kind of involved in, driving the product decision, not just delivering it. And that also is the right mindset to come in and figure out how to really take on a product management role and make it your own.
So Pooja, you mentioned before that the key role of a product manager is to build the right product or feature for the users. And I was wondering if there's a recipe or something that you've learned over time about what kind of mindset you need to have in order to identify and build the right feature for the users rather than just adding a new button on the app.
Also another really great question. And I have a thing I'll share with you guys. So I'm also a founder of a prop tech. And with my co-founders, I have a word that if anyone uses the F word, you have to put a dirham in the jar. The F word is feature. We're not allowed to use feature. And the reason I say that is because there is a tendency when there isn't enough product experience sometimes to create a product with just a set of features. So you go to somebody who's going to develop your product and you say, here are all the features I want in it. And what ends up happening, and I love the fact that you use the word recipe in your question, because I like to give this as an example, is imagine someone said to you, make a cake, and they gave you the recipe and all the ingredients were there, and all you did was you threw the ingredients together and you threw it in the oven, right? Your cake wouldn't turn out the way you need it to turn out. So I think of the features as ingredients, and I think of the recipe itself as product management. You have to build it in a way that's going to give you the right outcome. And you have to think about it from an experiential perspective, not just a feature perspective. So you could have, I'll give you another example because I told you I'm a foodie, so I love talking about food.
We're all foodies
We're
here.
on board.
Yeah.
We're on board.
If somebody said, hey, we're going to give you butter and put that in your cake, and that was one of the ingredients, and you smothered the butter on top as icing, nobody's going to love that cake. But that's the idea of features, right? If butter is a feature, how you apply that feature in your cake is going to make the whole world of difference on whether someone's going to eat your cake or not. So similarly with product, I like to give that analogy because it kind of really brings it home, where when you think about, okay, a bunch of features is a part of creating a product, but it's actually can't be what you look at when you make a product alone. When you look at making that product, you have to think about that end-to-end user experience and what you want that to be at the end. And then you have to approach it from that perspective.
So it's also about the taste of the cake, which is the experience the user is going to have holistically once they interact with your app or website, rather than just that one button, color, image, whatever it is that it is being added.
Correct. And when you have a more mature product, so say you have at Expedia, for example, we had a mature product and we would optimize this product. So we would think about, okay, now what do we need to do to get more people to convert or to add more products to their package or whatever the case may be, whatever we're trying to get them to do. At that stage, you still think about products to some extent, but you think about it in a very granular way. So let's take your example of the button. The button, oftentimes, we would do a lot of optimizations at any given time. In fact, each team had a challenge. Part of their goals were to do X number of experiments a quarter, a month, or whatever the case was. So our hotels team, for example, which was the largest team and the most profitable team at the time, probably still is, I think they had something like 100 experiments they had to run every month. So not small numbers, we're talking about large numbers. And sometimes those experiments were changed, like make this more effective, make the customer click on that purchase button, for example, right? And the experiment would be, okay, do we keep the button down to the right Do we change the color and make it blue? Do we put it up to the left? Like all these tiny, tiny modifications to what we might consider a feature would sometimes have the largest impact on the business. And you have to just then again, like get really into that mindset of getting super, super granular. But this is, I think, something that happens at more mature product levels, right? Not at the very beginning when you're going 0 to 1 or, building larger experiences. You really need to think about it from the cake model.
Amazing. And just because you picked up on that, what is the difference between being a product manager in a large established company versus starting a business from the ground up like your prop tech company in terms of product design and prioritization?
I believe it's quite a big difference. I would probably compare a large established company would probably be more like the Microsofts and the Expedias. I would say they are the ones where you could have a range of different product roles. So you could be, like I said, working for the team like a hotels team that has maybe 20 product managers on it and large engineering teams. And they're really looking at this step function optimization. So you have a lot of people focused on one product that are making these optimizations that are going to drive the business collectively when they all do well. So when they're looking for what is going to work well and drive an optimization. When you add up all of those optimizations, you have a large impact on the business or on the user. When it comes to the 0 to 1s or the prop tech, for example, or earlier stage companies like the one I founded, you're really thinking through some complex problems. You're taking something so complex and how do you build a product that for the end user is going to be super, super simple and intuitive that it will encourage them to use it. And then you build in things like, for all of these products, things like what we call loops in product management. So, you've got your data loops and your social loops and your viral loops and your habit loops and things like that, which will really drive people to come back and keep using your product over and over again. And what you want to do with that, and this is actually across all companies, you want to do this no matter what stage you're at, is that one investment you're making in building a product or a part of the product. How do you make that one investment help you get people to use your product? There will be some marketing costs associated with that usually. And then how do you make those users continue to use your product and bring more people into your product? So you're really compounding growth through the actual product experience. So, some of these methodologies span across all types of products, no matter what stage they're at. And oftentimes when you're looking at larger products or more established and mature products versus the more newer nascent products, you really need to think about, that end user first and think about what am I going to do to get them to do the behaviors I want them to do in my product to drive whatever level of success you need at that stage of your organization.
And this is just from my own experience of working with product managers. How do you look at that objectively? Because when you're especially in a smaller business, that's your baby, essentially. It's your cake. You've made it. Yeah. It was your idea from conception to reality. And if it's not working, what is the thing that you have to do to detach, to think about, okay, hang on a minute, maybe my vision wasn't the best route to go. How do you detach? What's been your experience there?
We have a really gruesome term in product. Which I've not heard anyone use in the UAE, but we used to use it all the time in the US, which is you got to be comfortable killing your baby.
Yeah.
It's a gruesome term,
yes.
Right? But, if you are a true product manager, you are going to be very data-driven. And the value of being a data-driven product manager is twofold. One is when you are trying to convince people of why you're doing the things you're doing and why you should prioritize X over Y, because there's always limited resources and you're going to probably upset one team if you're prioritizing something another team is doing. Getting everybody on board, if you have the data to show and support your decision, it's really hard to argue because everybody at the end of the day is working towards improving the user experience or driving higher engagement or more value for the business, whatever your goal is. If you can prove it with data, you can't really argue with that. So being a product manager that practices being data driven will bring you value in that. But having that at the core of everything you do also helps you understand when it's time to quote unquote kill your baby. Right. And it is tough to detach. I can tell you from my own experience, I had a baby in my Expedia, which was my product baby, not my little baby. And what had happened in that organization was we were literally building this amazing, cool, innovative new thing. And I was so lucky to be working. It was almost like an incubation of a project we had, and I was leading that. And one of our senior leaders who was leading a very critical part of the business, our search engine optimization side of the business, she left the company. And so and she sat in the same organization as me. And so my leader at the time, he called me, he said, listen, I know you love what you're doing right now, but I really need you to step into this role because we have a gap here and it's critical to the business. So I understood, like, my role as a leader was to step in and make things happen, but I had to hand over this baby in order to do that because I couldn't scale both. And it was really tough for me to do that. And so I didn't have to kill my baby, but I had a feeling that if I handed it over, it would probably be killed, right?
Did that happen?
It did. It did. So I did it and I said, yeah, I'll do what's best for the business. But at the end of the day, it was the right decision for the business because there were a lot of things that needed to be done there and fixed there. But it is one of those things where you do have to walk away from it. But the other thing to keep in mind is, a failure, people see that as a failure and it's not. It's actually such a great learning experience when you have to do that because the more you have to do that, the more comfortable you get with that, the easier it gets to detach from these kinds of things.
And it is all about iteration. And this is another maybe product specific term, but it does work like that, right? And that happens in academia as well. You just really need to test a lot of different things, see what works and what doesn't work. You just kind of have to take the feedback and move on.
Absolutely.
But I really love what you just mentioned now because I did have a question around building alignment between teams and making sure that you in the middle as the product manager kind of bringing engineering, design, marketing and the business priorities onto one page. When you're growing really fast and you're in Expedia and you have millions of customers globally, how do you build that alignment and how do you make sure that everybody's priorities essentially come into the same place and engineering is building the exact same feature that marketing needs to release at the right time to bring in sales?
This is a big challenge that a lot of companies face. There's a lot of different ways to do that. I can tell you in large organizations where they do agile planning, having a very structured approach, or agile development, I should say, having a very structured planning approach is very critical. So the teams I worked with in Expedia had multiple stakeholders. And we made it a practice to basically every quarter get in a room with our stakeholders. It was a whole process where, hey, if you have a request, you fill out this template and we ask you to be data driven. You tell us what it is that you want, why you want it, and what impact it's going to have on the business, the users, whatever metric you're tracking. And it really is about making sure everybody has a seat at the table. Everybody hears everybody else's requests. You do ceremonious things like, okay, you can all vote on, you put it all up and everyone gets 3 votes and you can vote. And of course, even if you feel like team A has a better, more impactful thing, you're going to definitely put one of your stickers on your own, right? So
Sure.
For voting, if you do a physical voting like that. But at the end of the day, what we say is, look, everyone has a voice, everyone has a say in it, but at the end of the day, the product and team makes a decision. They are the custodians of what gets built and what doesn't and why. And so final say is with product, but everybody has had a say in it. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of a psychological element where people say, okay, at least I was included in the decision. Even if it didn't go my way, I was included. And that's one way to deal with it. I always say product, to be honest, this is my theory and people might argue or my take on it, but I always say building product, especially consumer product, is 80% psychology and 20% actual technology, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying the effort in technology is 20%, it's a lot more, but the psychology behind why you're building what you're building is really critical. And that applies to internally when you're working with stakeholders as well, making them feel like, hey, I have a say in this, I'm being heard, I can, contribute to this and maybe move the business in a way forward that I want to. But also when you're building a product that your end user is using, psychologically, they need to want to use it. They need to want to come back and use it and engage with it and share it and all of those other things. So that's always something to keep at the forefront of your mind as well.
It's almost like bordering on like change management practices, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that you would connect those 2 dots. It's the first time it's ever come to me, but actually the methodology is the same.
Yeah.
Now let's dive a bit deeper into one of my favorite topics, which is super apps. And maybe we can start by defining what a super app is. But also, I would really love to hear your point of view on the integrations that are needed in order to build a super app successfully. And I know that you've done it with Careem. And I did mention at the beginning, I use Careem every single day. And sometimes I joke in the office that I should just divert my salary to Careem because I use it for food delivery, for taxis, for groceries, for cleaning, pretty much dry cleaning, literally everything. So it works really well and it's become such a big part of my life since I've moved here in Dubai. So first of all, thank you for that to you and the team. But yeah, can you tell us a bit about what is a super app and how do you create something that seamlessly integrates mobility, food delivery, customer support, and everything at the same time?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, you're the optimal super app customer. So when I joined Careem, I can't take full credit for developing the super app or anything. It was already under development, and the vision for the CEO's vision of the super app had already been established. So when I joined them, I was actually responsible for the mobility app. It essentially was a separate app, right, for ride hailing. And then over time, I started taking over a lot of the other apps, which and all the other experiences, right, like the food and the grocery and the Careem box where they deliver, stuff between. And then eventually I ended up leading the super app team, a platform team. So what happened is, first of all, what a super app is, I guess to answer your question, is predominantly what you described, right? It's a one place where you can do all of your things that are necessary for you. And it's not a new concept, super apps became, I think, very popular primarily in Southeast Asia, right? Grab was one of them, and WeChat and stuff. So, this concept of having all of your fundamental needs in one place was there. I like to think about, when I try to explain to people what a super app is, if they try to explain, actually your iPhone or whichever mobile smartphone you use is your super app in some way because you've got everything you want there in one place, right? That you can just quickly access. The beauty of, as you alluded to, the super app is that you have one login and you can do multiple things very quickly. And the idea behind it, again, is how do you make it super simple for your end user to do all of these things and seamless? So with the super app and your question about how do you make it seamless, et cetera, maybe I'll go back to when I was there. My whole premise was, okay, at that time, Careem was primarily used for ride hailing. So you've got your most engaged and highest audience in using mobility. And as you think about, putting these services, these existing Careem services together, plus these third-party services having a place in the app, right? How do you make it so that it is bringing value to each user in the way that they need it to bring value? So for me, for example, I use Careem primarily for two things. I use it for ride hailing today, and I use it for food. I don't necessarily use it for cleaning or renting a car, whatever else they offer. And that's because it doesn't suit my needs. But you, for example, said you use it for 5 or 6 things, right? Because we're so different in what our needs are, it becomes really, really critical to understand you versus me as an end user and build in personalization to make sure that you get what you need when you need it. And I'm reminded of Careem existing when I need it as well, and that I should go there first versus, wherever else you could get your food or ride hailing. So that's when I took over the super app platform, is when I says, okay, we need to start building a personalization engine on this. So how this works is basically you end up collecting data about each user at what I like to call a customer grain. So you're a customer grain, I'm a different customer grain. And if I can follow what you're doing and understand what you're doing, collect data about everything you're doing in the app, I can start to take that explicit data and start to apply some implicit information about what you might do next. And once I understand what you might do next, it's very easy for me to then get ahead of that and send you a notification or an email or whatever the case may be, however I'm communicating to you, to say, hey, I actually get ahead of your thought. And I say, hey, you know what? Saturday's coming up. Why don't you book your cleaning? Because you usually get it done on Saturday.
I need that actually, please. Yeah. I'll send a message to Careem. Please remind me every 3 weeks.
And imagine if you didn't need to send that message to Careem and Careem automatically did that.
Yeah.
Right? So getting to that level of hyper-personalization was what we started down the path with. And you have to really take a step back and understand, number one, what's the right way to collect data and how is the data and where is it stored and what's talking to what to make sure it's showing you the right message at the right time in the right channel. So really defining what that structure looked like behind the scenes was critical. And then, of course, the whole premise behind it was that when you open your app and I open my app, we'll see completely different things. Kind of like in Instagram today. If you open your Instagram and I open my Instagram or any of these feed-related apps, we'll see completely different things because they're so hyper-personalized to you. So that's kind of this idea of that was my thesis and my hypothesis on how do we get the super app to be super, super sticky, high engagement, like we talked about earlier, when you get one user using it, how do you get them to use it more and more? And how do you get them to tell other people to use it? Because when you share an amazing story you had about using this app, more people want to start using it and trying it out.
Yeah, for sure. And for an app like Careem, but really for anyone who doesn't live in the Middle East and doesn't use Careem, I guess Expedia can also be a good example. For any app like that, where you have a lot of partners also inputting and being integrated, because you can't deliver everything. The super app offers the menu, but the delivery is done by the partners, right? So what is the thinking behind bringing all of these partners into the app, and then super importantly, creating the same experience across, or making sure that they all deliver the same experience for me, Bianca, because I'm used to having my taxi downstairs in 2 minutes. So my grocery delivery should be the same, right?
Yeah.
Equally comfortable, the same buttons. It should be no fuss, really easy. Yeah. What would be a strategy for that?
It's a really interesting question, because you're absolutely right about talking about third-party integrations. And, when I was at Careem, the CEO, Mudassar, super smart, wonderful guy, he was explaining the vision to me when I interviewed with them is when we first started talking about it. And his whole concept behind it was, the way he described it, I remember still, was like, I want to create this, almost like, think about it as a mall where you have different tenants in the mall, right? And if you take that vision, you can't necessarily streamline your Abercrombie and Fitch with your Body Shop, right? Like, they're going to have their own brands and their own ways of doing things. So, but when you do bring them together in a digital experience, you're so right. Like, how do you make it so that it's something that your end user can identify is part of the same app, right? So there's a couple of different things I'll talk about there. One is the experience of when you land. That is the Careem experience. That's the mall. When you walk into Dubai Mall, there's some consistencies there, right? You're in Dubai Mall, for example, because of that. So making sure that experience that's in the control of Careem, the one company that we're talking about here, is consistent, is something that you are always going to see. Even if the content on it is different, like what you see is different from what I see, you still recognize it as the super app that you're used to using. The second thing is, bear in mind, when I left, we had just started onboarding tenants. So we hadn't quite figured this out yet. It was just more about trialing it. But, I would imagine there are some requirements UX requirements, I would say, that would need to be implemented on your, what we call the tenant side or the third party side, when they're bringing this into your app. So for example, if people are always used to, when you open the sub app, having the menu on the upper right hand side, maybe that's a requirement. If you want to be on this platform, these are some of the standardized ways in which you're going to have to appear in it. So I think those are probably some of the things you can put into place to make sure there's consistency for the user experience. When I was there, again, we hadn't gotten that far down the path, but I would imagine now with more and more products on there, they probably are looking at that. The other part one more thing I would say is, again, comes down to the data itself. Making sure that data of usage is consistently tracked across all the platforms and shared with Careem, so that they can understand how people are using the different products, and probably give some feedback as well on how to optimize that across, maybe we're finding, people who rent cars are also likely to get food delivery. I don't know. But being able to kind of optimize that and say, hey, maybe in your app, you can cross promote something or not. Again, I don't know what their agreements are, to be honest, but there are opportunities there for that kind of thing, for sure.
For sure. And I was going to add that if something goes wrong with the experience, as a customer, when I reach out for support, it's always offered by Careem. So there's also a big responsibility on behalf of the super app, and even a risk for Careem to integrate these partners. So there has to be a lot of thinking and vetting and so on. Because once somebody comes, let's say the cleaning service comes onto the app and they don't deliver, and as a customer, I'm used to the standard and I have an issue, I'll go and I'll put that on Careem, right? For the rest of time, my impression of that failure will stick with Careem rather than with whoever the cleaning is just live, right? So, so there's also a lot to consider as a large business looking to build a super app. As a product manager, making that decision with the business is quite big.
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. Like, the customer support angle is really critical as well to making it a cohesive experience. Yeah, it's a good call.
And just to tap on to something that you mentioned earlier. So I think Careem also, when you think about products, I think a lot of the time it has something to do with timing, right? And I think Careem's explosion to the market had a lot to do with timing and a lot of untapped potential. Yeah. And right now in the UAE and Saudi, there's a lot of ambitious tech agendas going on at the moment, from AI into regulation all the way to like smart cities and deep tech. So where do you see the biggest untapped opportunities from when it comes to product innovation in the GCC? And, you know, those buzzwords, are they clouding what actually needs to be solved?
I think, you know, GCC and their agenda for, you know, the progressive adoption of technology, deep tech, all of that stuff is so impressive. And I've only lived in the UAE, but I love the digitization of almost everything that I do that's government related here. It's phenomenal. It's in fact a little bit more advanced, I would say, than some of the other places I've lived. And I know Saudi is also investing similarly in this stuff. I think there's a couple of things going on right now. And this is with the AI becoming so much more available to everybody. And, you know, when ChatGPT launched, it became something that you could like everyone knew AI existed somewhere, but unless you've worked on a product or something, or you've worked in a tech company where you've actually used AI, it wasn't tangible really for people. So with ChatGPT and stuff becoming publicly accessible, it just kind of skyrocketed, right? And I think one thing that happened alongside that was that AI became this new buzzword that everything has to be AI. So there is a little bit of, yes, AI is definitely going to compound in growth fast because it is AI, and, you know, neural networks and all of that stuff lend itself to high growth. But I think when you just take a step back and you look at kind of, you know, the maturity of a market in tech adoption, you know, the US, for example, in the US, why did tech, you know, or in the West, I should say, growth and maturity happen sooner there? And when I think about it, it's because the cost of labor is so much more higher there that you needed to look for solutions to reduce cost of labor and scale. And technology lends itself well to that, right? And so the investment in technology happens sooner because of that. And that's why maturity progressed sooner there. When you look at the East, cost of labor is not as expensive. And you know, you can throw bodies at a problem. And the more bodies you throw, you might resolve it sooner. And I think the advent of, you know, investing in tech and really driving high growth through technology now or more recently has become a thing because you need to compete globally, right? And you need to establish yourself globally. So it's just going with the times, and there's no wrong or right. It's just, that's just how life is. So in my mind, I think, you know, it's really great that this region has these agendas for, you know, tech advancement. But I think there's also some very baseline things that need to be addressed right off the bat. You know, this region is, again, known to be leading in fintech, for example. That's great. They understand finance. They fundamentally understood finance, and turning that into technology solutions just almost second nature. So I understand why fintech is a big thing here. But there are other areas of technology, health tech, prop tech, all of these things, which I know that the governments that are supporting and people are building here in the region, but they need to almost crawl, walk, run, you know, like to build these products, you also need really sound practices in product management and technology and all of these things so that when you build something that is going to be impactful, it can scale and it can actually have the longer term impact it needs to. And really understanding, you know, some of the science behind product and tech will really help the region, you know, accelerate in all areas of technology. But sometimes I feel like we're trying to sprint when we're not even walking yet, you know? Mm-hmm. So for me, a lot of what I do on the advisory side is, you know, almost like a product doctor, like I built this and it's not working. And, you know, when you go to the doctor and you say, oh, I think I've sprained my ankle or I've broken my ankle. And the doctor's like, no, you just twisted it, you know, like, so it's like kind of like taking that lens of, you know, what you think you built, but you actually kind of didn't, you had the wrong diagnosis of what you're doing. So that all comes back to, I think, experience and understanding that. So yes, I think there's a lot of potential in the region. I think that pacing it and making sure the fundamentals are right overall before we accelerate is probably the wisest move right now.
To pivot back to something you mentioned earlier when you were mentioning AI, because obviously it's going to affect the type of products that are created, but then also how do you see it transforming the role of the product manager as well? What roles do you think will have to evolve? What aspect of the role will have to evolve?
So I think with AI and the advent of AI, the product manager role will change significantly. But I think the tasks that product managers do, which are a lot more of the delivery-based tasks, those are probably things that can be taken over by AI, like writing user stories and helping with prioritization and those kinds of things, and, you know, managing, you know, agile processes, all of that stuff. I think more of the onus on the product manager will be to upskill themselves on, number one, the emerging technologies, because things are evolving very, very quickly, to stay abreast of that. And number two, the strategy part of it and the discovery part of that and understanding the user behavior. I think the behavioral science and the psychology piece will be much more important for product managers to really be able to understand, drive, communicate, and apply. And in the way that AI is moving right now, the task-oriented stuff, I think, can be very much covered by AI.
So thank you, Pooja. I think it's a really nice way to finish off the conversation where we kind of look at the future of the role. So thank you for all your insights there.
You're welcome.
I think we asked some really big questions and you shared a lot of...
really big answers.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely super valuable for those people wanting to develop themselves in this role. So
awesome.
Thank you for all
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. So we do like to close off the episode with a teaser of the wildcard question, and that will be released in our bonus episode. This kind of allows our listeners to reflect and digest on the conversation that we've just had and think about how they themselves would answer the question before they tune in to the next episode. So with that in mind, we will be asking you, AI and quantum computing are redefining product strategy. What will a product roadmap look like in 2030 for an ever-evolving product? So I'll leave that there. And we will pick this up in our next episode.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.